Hello and welcome to GW Prime Live. Your way is here. I'm Nibedita Mohanta, your host for today's session that will revolve around the topic empowering communities through geospatial technology. It is an honor to welcome Amy Coughenour Betancourt, President and CEO of Cadasta Foundation. Welcome to Geospatial World Prime Live.
Nibedita, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Cadasta Foundation is a globally recognized organization dedicated to improving land and resource rights through innovative digital solutions. Under her leadership, Cadasta has empowered communities, governments, and organizations with geospatial technology to enhance land tenure, transparency, and sustainability. Amy is a global speaker on geospatial technology for SDGs, women's land rights, sustainable food systems, and community land tenure. She is passionate about community data empowerment, ensuring local communities have access to tools for meaningful development. Today, we'll explore Cadasta's impact, the future of land rights, and technology's role in building a more sustainable world. I'll start with my first question. Cadasta has been working on digital tools to document land and resource rights, especially for marginalized communities. How does geospatial technology help streamline this process, and what challenges remain in digitizing land records?
Well, thank you for that question, and for that lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. So, Cadasta primarily deploys geospatial technology and training with partners who lead the documentation and mapping work on the ground. So just to be clear, Cadasta we don't do the mapping and documentation ourselves. Our role is to build the capacity of trusted local stakeholders who do the work. So we see that geospatial technology really helps the work in three major ways. First of all, it helps streamline documentation. Geospatial technology helps by accurately mapping land boundaries, creating digital records, and it makes it easier to store, share, update uh, data, and also improve transparency and accessibility for marginalized communities. Secondly, geospatial technology improves data accuracy. Um, GPS and satellite imagery help ensure precise land mapping for communities and reduce human errors and ensure that records reflect actual land ownership. There's a whole, data accuracy is important in some, more important in some use cases than in others. For example, in urban use cases versus maybe indigenous territory demarcation. Thirdly, regarding the issue of challenges to digitizing land records, so some of those issues include limited internet access. So we work in very remote locations where internet is not stable, and oftentimes most every project that we have requires offline workflows. But also, there are challenges around lack of digital literacy in some marginalized communities, as well as difficulties in integrating traditional land records, whether customary land rights or indigenous territorial land records, with modern digital systems. So when there's a lack of integration of that local data into, for example, national land information systems, it really creates gaps in the digitization process. Um, One other point that I'd like to make is the way that geospatial technology is used really depends on the type of land being documented. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, urban titling usually requires greater submeter accuracy and better resolution imagery to work with. So you can really see boundaries and parcels very clearly. Whereas customary land in rural areas or indigenous territories can be more fit for purpose, meaning that the systems are tailored to meet the needs of people and their relationship to land, and support security of tenure, rather than having very strict and high standard requirements for the data.
Right. Uh, Participatory mapping is a key approach in Cadasta's project. How do you ensure that communities actively engage in the mapping process? And what role does GIS technology play in making these maps actionable for decision making?
Participatory mapping is really key to Cadasta's work. It is really the heart of the work because it ensures that the affected communities understand why their land is being mapped, what the importance of that is, how that relates to land tenure security, whether it's for tenure rights or whether it's for better land management or some other purposes. They really need to understand what it's about. Why is it important? How does it protect rights? Secondly, participatory engagement at the community level is done by our partners who are on the ground. They do that work because they have trust relationships with these communities. So participatory processes ensure that different voices in the community are included and are participating and have a say. So there's a lot of work that's done even before any mapping happens. There's a lot of work that's done to engage community members, and to make sure that they understand the process. And this really helps address issues around conflict, around fear of what's happening, around making sure that there's inclusion of women and youth and other marginalized groups, and ensuring that people consent to having their land being mapped. So we really ensure that communities are involved in every step of the mapping process, from data collection to validation to analyzing their data, and that helps them with a sense of ownership. And then finally, GIS technology plays an important role because the maps and the dashboard and the storytelling tools enable community members to actually visualize their land rights, to make informed decisions, and advocate for policy changes based on clear data driven evidence.
So in Uganda, Cadasta has supported the issuance of customary certificates of ownership. How does spatial data contribute to securing land tenure, and what lessons have been learned from implementing geospatial solutions in customary land systems?
That's a really great question. So Cadasta's been working in Uganda since about 2019. And we work under a partnership with the Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development, and as well as the civil society organizations. So let me just say first, customary land tenure systems are based on traditional, unwritten, and sort of local rules and practices. So oftentimes, customary land is managed by certain cultural, ethnic, family, or other societal groups. And they often fall under different land laws within a country. So, Uganda, 80% of the land in Uganda is under customary tenure. It is a huge amount of the land. So having a scalable solution to map and document and formalize this land is really critical to Uganda's economy and to land tenure security of rural Ugandans. So in 2023, the Ministry of Land in Uganda introduced new regulations that required high precision standards of 60 centimeters for surveying customary land holdings. That was a new, very rigorous standard that was put into place. So we needed to make sure that there were offline workflows and that these, what they call area land committees and community leaders, were able to collect land data with minimal supervision. And that was participatory with people in the community. So Cadasta worked with the ministry and with a civil society partner called Ujama Foundation, using Esri Survey 123 and also Trimble Catalyst GNSS systems to streamline workflows to make sure that we could achieve that level of accuracy around geospatial data collection and make the process more efficient and more cost effective. So what we learned in that process is that it is really critical to have prior community outreach and training, not just on how to use the tools, but what are their rights under customary land laws? What does the process entail? What can they do with the certificate of customary ownership? Um, and how the whole process was going to work. So we learned that lesson, and we also learned that we had to include community information on the importance of women's land rights, the need to include women on these certificates when data was being collected at the household level. And by doing that, by working with a civil society partner called Ukabak and with Ujama Foundation, we were able to achieve 77% of the certificates with women's names or jointly with their spouses. So we had a lot of learning around that, not just about how to deploy the technology and what technology was going to be needed, but also how we were going to work with the communities to achieve results.
That's wonderful. So, your work with Cool Earth in the Peruvian Amazon focuses on empowering indigenous communities to monitor their land. How is geospatial technology being used for deforestation tracking and climate resilience in this region?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it also shows Cadasta's increasing work with Indigenous communities around the world. We actually work in 14 countries with Indigenous populations to help them map and secure their territories, but also use data for land monitoring um, to support to monitor threats and other things. So Indigenous people, just as a little background, Indigenous peoples and local communities collectively manage 50% of the world's land, 80% of the world's biodiversity, and 17% of the total carbon in forests are managed by these groups. Yet, only 10% of their lands are legally recognized and protected. And it's very important because these lands are under threat. They're under threat from illegal logging, from illegal mining, and other kinds of crimes, other illicit activities inside these forests and on these
Right.
lands. So in Peru, we work with a great organization called Cool Earth, and it's a UK based NGO. And we worked with them to create a bespoke software solution called Rainforest Labs. And Rainforest Labs is being used by Peruvian indigenous communities in the Amazon. These are Awajun and Ashininka communities, nationalities. And what they're doing is they're mapping their territories, and the rainforest land equips them with computers, tablets, Wi-Fi, so internet connection, digital devices, solar energy, and just a base of operations. And so that has really transformed their work. And the project trains community-based GIS specialists and local mappers on things like survey design, effective mapping techniques, dashboard development, how to read and use satellite imagery. And they're doing this for biodiversity monitoring, for monitoring these threats that I mentioned earlier, and
Right.
really strengthening their ability to combat these challenges and to protect and maintain their territories.
So, one of the biggest concerns with land and resource mapping is ensuring data accuracy and accessibility. How does Cadasta use geospatial technology to validate and maintain up to date information, land information, and how do you address digital literacy challenges in remote communities?
Well, the key for us is that we're not doing the mapping ourselves. So it's always about enabling and training local stakeholders to do that. So when it comes to data accuracy and accessibility, they know what kind of information they want to collect, and they know why it's important in terms of maintaining land rights and having more efficient land governance. So to increase digital literacy, we use a train the trainer model. And what that means is we train um, people inside these trusted organizations. They might be Indigenous alliances, Indigenous organizations, or local NGOs doing land and other things. We train them on the use of the tools, and we also train them to be trainers. So then they in turn train community mappers to use the tools. And so basically, this builds digital literacy and GIS literacy within these organizations and communities over time. So that's really important in terms of our model. And also, with regard to sort of addressing these digital literacy and GIS challenges, we developed a GIS assessment tool so that we can go into an organization and we can look at 7 different areas. For example, the level of software they're using, what kind of hardware, what their funding is for the GIS function, what their data collection skills are, how they're managing their data systems in terms of storage and data management, and so other areas like that. And that way we can assess where they are in terms of, level, and
Right.
then we can show their progress over time. So our focus is to continue to build GIS and digital literacy with partners on the ground.
Moving on to next question, geospatial data can be a powerful tool for influencing policy and governance. How is Cadastre working with governments and policymakers to integrate spatial data into land tenure reforms and decision making?
It's a very good question about policy and governance. I will say Cadasta tends to focus more on implementation of
Mhm.
land laws. So because a lot of times there will be laws on the books and policies that are actually okay, but there's very little implementation. So part of our mission is to try to help groups actually get those laws implemented on the ground so that communities are getting their rights recognized. However, getting rights recognized, it requires government engagement because governments are the ones that recognize those rights. So
Absolutely.
Cadasta does have a government advisory service within our organization and we've done several projects working directly with governments. But I think, what's important in this context around government policy and their engagement is that every country context is very different and very complex. So, you know, the way that we approach that is we're trying to equip and train our partners on the ground who are working on these issues on policy and advocacy. And they're often managing these sensitive relationships with government. So, unless we have a project that is intended to directly work with government to improve land information systems and improve land services, um, we're mostly working with communities. And so we train communities on data analysis tools like dashboards, using satellite imagery and maps, change detection to show, like, for example, changes in deforestation, things like that. And also story maps, storytelling tools using geospatial data so that they have the evidence and the tools for advocacy and policy influence. So Cadasta doesn't directly do advocacy and policy influence. We advise and then we support our groups.
Right. So, moving on to my last question, which is around AI and machine learning, which has disrupted the market right now. With advancements in AI, machine learning, and satellite imaging, where do you see the future of geospatial technology in securing land rights, and how is Cadastra preparing to integrate these innovations into its work?
You're right. It is really disrupting almost every industry, and there's just so much more to come that we're trying to learn and trying to understand. I will say that the capabilities and use cases for AI are changing daily. I mean, there have just been major, major advances in this. And so, what we knew a month ago or a year ago or a week ago may not be the same, today.
Right.
So, one example, I was just at an ESRI conference last week, And I was seeing some of the incredible AI tools that are being built into ArcGIS, which is the suite that we use with our partners, and just using those tools to leverage um, data to analyze and create these amazing data sets like in seconds. It's just incredible to watch that functionality happen before your eyes. So, things like detecting land features, buildings, degradation of forests, deforestation, that can already be done. There's a lot of machine learning that's been done around that. More and more AI features are being created every day to speed that up and make it more efficient. And it does offer a lot of opportunity for Cadasta and our partners to better understand that intersection between land tenure, climate change, community rights, livelihoods, biodiversity, deforestation, a lot of things. However, I will say that we do approach this with caution, because what's important to understand is that our partners and the communities they serve own their own data.
Right.
They have to decide what tools are best for them. And there's still a lot of unknowns about AI, and there's a lot of sensitivity around data, access to community data, and how they want that data to be used. So we don't make decisions about how to use community data. So we're going to be looking at Cadasta, we're going to be looking at how we can develop examples and different training modules to share with our partners so that they can look at these tools and they can decide whether they want to use AI, how they want to use AI, and how it serves their purposes.
Right. Thank you so much for your time and this insightful discussion. I'm sure the audience had a great time listening to you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Nivedita. It's always a pleasure to engage with Geospatial World and your audience. And I'm so happy that we were able to take some time today and speak a little bit about Cadasta and the work. And of course, we've been a partner with Geospatial World for a long time, and we're so grateful for all the support you've given us. Thank you.